Hey, my name is MakiahTime, and I stream Hearthstone every single day on Twitch.tv. I am known for playing Overheal Priest probably more than anything else right now, and I made several guides for this deck in the past in a few different forms, written a couple videos on this channel. And this video will serve as my final and most comprehensive guide to what I think is the best deck in the game across all ranks. Um, the reason for the length of this guide is mostly due to the complexity and non-linear nature of the deck. It's not a simple combo deck or a typical control priest deck, as it has multiple modes, and very few games are exactly the same. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing to my channel. I'm new to YouTube, but this is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I've recently committed to becoming a full-time content creator. So I plan to upload more regularly. Enjoy. So, Overheal Priest is a combo control deck that operates on value engines to both control the board, deal damage, and generate card advantage. Value engines are card combos that can do things over and over. I will talk more about these in a sec. For now, let's talk about the Mulligan. Overheal Priest has two primary cards that you want in almost every matchup: Crimson Clergy and Injured Hauler. I want these two cards more than anything else. If you do not have these cards in your hand, I recommend tossing everything. However, if you have these cards, Fan Club, cards that discover minions such as Bird Watching and Creation Protocol, Hidden Gem, and Idol's Adoration are also fine to keep. Tip the Potent and Funnel Cakes are cards you can keep on their own. However, be aware that the way you use your Funnel Cakes will decide your games. Everlasting with Bird Watching and Creation Protocol can work versus anything that's not aggro. So if you don't have those other cards and you know you're playing this slow matchup, that is fine. Crimson Clergy and Power Chord Synchronize as the last card combo that I think is really worth keeping. Everything else I just recommend tossing. Don't settle for less. Cards like Creation Protocol and Bird Watching are generally fine to draw later in the game, so I don't recommend keeping them as much. If you keep a Creation Protocol and Bird Watching, hoping to get a Crimson Clergy or an Injured Hauler, you're likely to die if you miss on it. Sometimes you hit a bunch of garbage and then you just lose. It's unlikely, but it's usually not worth taking the risk, in my opinion. For your early game, the best way to win games before they even get going is to play a Crimson Clergy on one. The only class I would almost never do this versus is Death Knight, as they have the most ways to kill a 1/3. You can't always play the Clergy on one when going second if your opponent has bigger minions on board already. This happens a lot when playing against Warlock, for example. If you can't play your Clergy on one, or you can often save it for like a Clergy Power Chord Synchronized to create a 2/5 on board that your opponent has to deal with. Not all these plays are designed to just draw a bunch of cards. The threat of drawing cards is often more powerful than the cards you draw, and dictating how our opponents play the game will keep us in a stronger position than if we were to play this more passively. Basically, spending your mana now is better than saving it for later if you're forcing them to remove the. Pause for a second, guys. We played Crimson Clergy on one. We still have 30 HP, even though we're playing against an aggro deck, and the 2 turns of theirs have already passed. Isn't that wild? If you do not have a Clergy in hand, then the most important thing to consider is, do you have an Injured Hauler, and how are you going to spend the rest of your mana? Many decks rely on winning the game with minions, and Injured Hauler, when used correctly, can clear about just about any board while dominating the board with a 3/7 stat line that is very hard to contest. It is important to consider the 3/7 stat line when using your Hauler, as often playing a big minion early like that can just win you the game. Just from the threat of it constantly killing board. So it doesn't have to instantly remove everything. Sometimes just having a 3/7 on board bigger than all the other minions, and if they trade into it, then that's a board clear as well. Turn 2 Hidden Gem is a great way to enable both your early Hauler plays and your early Clergies. If we have exactly Hidden Gem in our hand and a Power Word Synchronized, then it may be worth coining the gem to buff it as a 3/4 on turn 2. So you coin Hidden Gem, turn 2, play Synchronized. You have a 3/4 Hidden Gem in your hand, a 3/4 Hidden Gem on the board. That's a way to contest the board with a threatening minion, or you can just leave it there to let it passively heal you, depending on how the game goes. Both those are pretty good. And then when you eventually get your Clergy or your Hauler, you have ways to trigger them. In many matchups, the most important thing is to play Love Everlasting early. My warning with this card is that it's not great to play versus aggro unless you have a strong plan to do the next turn, such as playing the Love Everlasting into like a Holy Spring Water on a hauler or something like that. Remember that this card also loses its effect if you don't play a spell every turn. So if you play Love Everlasting on 3 and have a handful of minions, you kind of wasted a turn. So sometimes it's worth not playing right away. But overall, it's a pretty card. If your opponent is playing slow, or you're playing another Overheal Priest player, or you know your opponent is building up for a combo, just play your Hedonis on turn 4. You can coin it down on turn 3 as well, but the main thing is just don't think about it. It's a 4/4. Sometimes it's a 5/5, or a 6/5. Sorry, if you got it from bird watching. And if your opponent can't clear it, then they're pretty likely to die. Sometimes they do clear it, and you resurrect it with Rest in Peace, and then your opponent dies. That alone can control the board and win the game on its own. Hedonis and Injured Hauler are both good cards to play early if you have Rest in Peace in hand. It's sometimes worth just playing these cards on their own without even healing them, just to get them back with Rest in Peace and clear the board. Do remember that Rest in Peace also resurrects for your opponent when making these plays, so don't put yourself in a situation where the resurrecting an Injured Hauler is actually worse than what your opponent can do, for example. So with all this in mind, I just want to conclude the early game talk by reminding you that the way you spend your mana in the first 4 turns will always dictate how the rest of the game goes. So take your time. These turns are really important. With these guidelines, the most powerful play should become obvious if you think about it enough time. And the more you play the deck, the more obvious these plays will become. If you spend all your mana, you probably should. Or if you can spend all your mana, you probably should. So let's talk about the mid game and what a value engine is. The mid game for Overheal Priest feels a little different every game, and that can be intimidating for new players. My goal here is to demystify this part of the game as much as possible. I mentioned value engines a few times in this video, and it's time that we talk about what these are. These are combos that can generate value, control the board, and deal damage over and over and over. A good example of this is Injured Hauler plus Hidden Gem. If this value engine exists on the board, you can close your eyes and fall asleep, and when the rope burns out, you will end your turn by dealing 2 damage and overhealing your Injured Hauler. That's just going to happen. Once you have an engine set up like that, you can keep adding to it, rebuilding it as the game goes on. To kill the Hauler, make it a Hauler. You can add a Clergy to it. You can add more healing with a Fan Club, etc., etc. Your deck has lots of options of what kind of value engine you want to create. And you have a lot of ways to discover cards to enable this engine. Now let's simplify this even further and give these engine components a priority, right? Crimson Clergy, Injured Hauler are priority 1 cards. You should always take these cards when offered first, especially if you don't have them. If you don't have any priority 1 cards, you need to get those in your hand. Priority 2 cards is your heal cards like Hidden Gem, Fan Club, Flash Heal even, and Funnel Cake. Pip can also kind of go here if you already have some healing in your hand and you just need more of it. Then Pip is interesting to discover if you already have the other stuff going on. I would take that as priority 2. I wouldn't do that as the first thing often, but the second thing, sure. Now, if you have priority 1 and priority 2, you have an engine started. Like your engine is going, great. Priority 3 cards I'm going to add here is your Amanthuls, your Hedonis, and your Love Everlasting. These cards are fine to discover if you have a realistic plan to use them without dying. So this is where planning ahead comes to mind. You already have your priority 1 and priority 2. That means you're clearing the board with Hauler, or you're drawing cards with Crimson Clergy. You're effectively doing things your opponent has to answer. Now it's time to look for these big bombs in your priority 3 cards and win with that. The only other thing you need to know to navigate this mid game is to be cautious of how many Clergies you're playing and your board space in general. Sometimes you end up with like 4 or 5 Clergies. You find yourself overdrawing uncontrollably. This can be one of the only ways you lose a game if you're in an unlosable game. As oops, I played 6 Clergies and a Hidden Gem, and now my opponent will play minions, so I'm dying. Be careful of that. That can happen if you play like a Pip with a bunch of Clergies in hand. It's often worth dumping the Clergies first, maybe just having one that you copy to avoid that. You can get out of that situation with the Rest in Peace if you can force your opponent to resurrect a big minion. That can win and get you out of that sticky situation. But the best way to get out of that situation is not to put yourself in there in the first place and consider your board space and how many cards you actually want. So let's talk about the late game and how we actually win the game. The best way to kill your opponent is with Hedonis. The standard, there's no amount of health or boards that can save you from a proper Hidana setup in good conditions. So when everything goes right, then Hidanas can do a ton of damage. Like you saw in the start of this video, Hidanas can end games in a couple ways. So here's some general concepts. You play Adonis when your opponent has no minions. You need 6 heals on average to kill. Saving up heals to kill your opponent with Adonis makes a lot of sense if you're in a combo mirror, for example. You know your opponent's playing a combo deck, then let's just save up and kill him with Adonis before he can kill us with our combo. Pip plus funnel cakes is the best way to enable Adonis to do absurd damage. You can copy Pip with Power Word Synchronize and Creation Protocol. These give you plenty of mana to do whatever you want and find your 6 heals no problem. In the Warrior matchup, that's actually your best win condition, is to just keep playing Pip, keep making funnel cakes. You do have to keep an eye on your hand space, but you can always play Hidanas, start funnel caking, and then play the Pip, and like the second or third or fourth or fifth Pip, and then kind of can keep that going. Once you have hand space for 4 funnel cakes, you play the Pip, fill your hand up again, etc. Sometimes you can play a Rest in Peace that has Hidanas in it, and then kill your opponent that way. After you play an Injured Hauler, this is mostly enabled by having a Love Everlasting as a 1 mana Rest in Peace. Is usually stronger than a 4 mana damage Hidanas. I will often play Hidanas expecting him to die, then play an Injured Hauler the next turn to clear the board, and then Rest in Peacing on the 3rd turn with Hidanas to then kill your opponent. This is kind of like a 3-turn kill setup. This is pretty easy to do. You'll probably do this a lot. If you can efficiently set this up, you'll win more games this way than if you try and win any other way with this deck, to be honest. So I'll use that as your bread and butter. Now, you can use aman'thul to control the board and enable Hidanas if you're still trying to win with Hidanas. You can make space by removing minions, so your Hidanas will hit face when you do summon it. And then when your aman'thul dies, you can resurrect it, play Hidanas, and heal the Hidanas to full, copy the Hidanas, and then start doing your funnel cakes, your fan clubs, and everything like that, all your AoE heals, and it'll proc twice each time, doing 10 damage per proc. That's easily becomes a lot of damage. Yeah, sometimes you can even do like multiple aman'thuls, or your aman'thul just doesn't die, and you can just play the Hidanas and then start doing that. There's a few different ways to enable Hidanas to do more damage because of aman'thul. However, you don't need Hidanas to win the game. Aman'thul is kind of strong enough just to win games on their own as well. We call this aman'thul printing. If you can't win with Hidanas because you ran out of healing, trying to control the board, or you just can't seem to get them in your hand, which happens sometimes, you might as well just go for aman'thul control. Almost no deck can beat 3+ aman'thuls. To set this up, you can forge a creation protocol and choose aman'thul. If you're on like turn 5 or 6 and you have the board controlled, but you don't have any way to win, this is a good way to you just take your aman'thul, especially if there's no realistic way to win with Adonis in the next couple turns. You can also set up Love Everlasting to play Synchronize on the aman'thul the turn you play it. So like turn 7 or so, you play it, aman'thul Synchronize, you have another one in your hand. Now you have 2 aman'thuls. Great. Then you can also do things like, if you have Love Everlasting active, you can pip the Rest in Pieces because they'll cost 1 mana for 4 more aman'thuls. That's a really fun way to print aman'thuls. And I don't consider this the primary way to win games, but it's a very good way to win games. Hidanas is more consistent, but aman'thul wins like 9 out of 10 times if you have to go that route. A word of caution with aman'thul is that creating a 6-drop is generally not the strongest way to stay alive. Like summoning aman'thul, making a 6-drop, it can be great, but there are some rush 6-drops that will heal you. And there's a lot of death rattles that can keep you alive, but a lot of 6-drops are just bad. And cards like, if you're playing Death Knight, they can generate a cane, or if they have an aman'thul and they get a cane, your taunts don't even matter. Sometimes they can just silence and remove the taunt, and then it's like you did nothing, and you just die through it. Removing minions, if you count the damage and the opponent can't kill you, removing their minions is the best way just to stay alive. You can't play around everything, but Moving minions is always good. And remember that when you rest in peace in aman'thul, it will always summon a minion for your opponent, which often forces you to remove 2 minions. So yeah, removing 2 minions over and over again until your opponent has nothing, and you just resing aman'thuls just for fun, and playing aman'thuls is fun. And all the cards you generate from aman'thul, good way to win the game. Now versus Death Knight, the biggest threat is going to be Reska, so I would try and play around that as best you can by having either a second aman'thul on board. Even having like a hidden gem on board can be kind of nice. However, they do have AoE to deal with that, so I wouldn't rely on that unless you have to. Sometimes you have to display the aman'thul and hope he doesn't have it, but they always do. So try and have more aman'thuls in hand, so you can make sure one of them dies before they're stolen. If they're stolen, they don't end up in rest in peace. Well, not for you at least. Priest is the same concept, but instead you have to play around your opponent's aman'thul. Having more aman'thuls than the enemy priest is a great way to win games too. By the way, if you're playing against a lot of priests. There's a third, less discussed win condition that not many people consider with Overheal Priest that haven't played it a lot, and that's just Injured Hauler by himself. Injured Hauler, if you get some of those plays I mentioned earlier off when talking about the early game, you can get a Hauler set up. It can just win games right away. Sometimes they can't clear it, and you end up sitting there with an Injured Hauler that's just gonna dominate the board forever. Then you won. Like, your opponent should concede. They can't play minions. I even joke sometimes, like if on stream, if my opponent plays a Pipsy from Pipsy Paladin, it reses 3 minions from their deck when it dies. So I always joke that if they play that, I can just play like 2 Injured Haulers and clear their entire hand, deck, and board, which is pretty strong. They kind of run out of things if you do that. Yeah, so if you're losing games more often with the priest, I just recommend taking a look at how you use your haulers and just leaning more into that being. So that's the bulk of the guide. There's some closing notes that I think are really important. So I want to remind you guys first to take your time, spend all your mana, and value the stats of the minions you have on board. Bird watching buffs attack and health. Power Chord can buff attack and health. Adonis is a 4/8. Injured Hauler is a 3/7. And aman'thul is a 3/10. Those are huge stat lines that can easily overwhelm boards. I didn't talk about Funnel Cake much in this guide, and I might make a video talking just about Funnel Cake and all the wonderful ways you can use that card to win games. But I think the main thing to know with Funnel Cakes is you shouldn't use it unless you're kind of forced to, or you're using it to win the game. Not every board needs to be clear. Not having Funnel Cakes for your Adonis can just lose you the game, because you don't have the mana you need to actually get all your heals off. Pip plus Funnel Cake makes every game interesting and a lot easier. So if you're using them before you can pip them, that's not going to be good. So if you're using like a Funnel Cake just to draw cards off of Clergy, or to deal that last 2 damage to clear a board that doesn't even really matter, stop it. The last concept you need to know to play this deck is card advantage. This means having more cards and more things to do than your opponent. Often people play Overheal Priest and run out of cards in hand, and they just can't do anything, and they're like, wow, this deck is terrible. So consider if the play you want to make is strong while also leaving you with something to do the next turn. You want to make sure you're not doing anything, but also that the thing you're doing isn't leaving you stranded in your hand, right? And if you're in a situation where you have to go all in, how many outs are you leaving you in your hand to actually continue to play the game and have options? So yeah, just take your time with those decisions as well. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks for watching. If this guide helped you, please consider liking and subscribing. Also, check out my live stream every day at 5 p.m. PST, twitch.tv/MakiahTime. Thanks, guys.